MOUZ fans, come here. We did Gamer Legion, now we're doing MOUZ, so we're set for another 3K view episode, as apparently Gamer Legion didn't have a lot of fans, and now they're out of the major. So let's see if MOUZ is any different. And we brought Yanko on for this one. Yanko, are you a MOUZ fan?
I'm a fresh Gamer Legion hater. They completely ruined all my pick'ems. They lost their first two games to both of my 0-3 picks. And also, foolishly enough, they were my 3-0 pick because I thought, oh, well, surely they'll beat Fluxo in the first game. And then who knows, right? Like, they prepare very well. I did forget about the whole 100 Thieves thing and that they're probably a dead team. So that was a mistake. But yeah, I mean, a MOUZ fan, no. I think once you guys told me the topic, I was a bit surprised because I don't want to say turn a corner, but I do have a different opinion about them going into the major than I do generally, because generally MOUZ for me were the whole year a really, really good team that's never going to win a tournament. Like, that's just who they are. You know, they'll beat even the teams that they lose to. We saw them beat Vitality at different stages of the tournament, but when it matters the most, they'll fail, right? And they'll go missing and then won't be able to close it out. So that has been the problem for MOUZ, and it's been apparent that was the case. But going into this major, I think it's different because no one's talking about them as a sort of, you know, they were the number 2 team in the world. They're always fighting Vitality. Now you have Vitality, Furia first, then Vitality, and then kind of Falcons, and then MOUZ is right sort of there, but not really in the top conversation, and that might alleviate some of the pressure from them, which always gets to them in these big games.
Mm-hmm. You said you've turned the corner, Cologne, right? Yeah.
You go.
I just wanted to say, you said you turned a corner. What exactly, like, what do you mean? Like, what made you turn this corner?
I mean, it's just the fact that I think this is the position in which they want to be in, where they're not talked about as much, you know, and they can just sort of from the shadows perhaps go on a run at the major because they've beaten all these teams. They're one of the few teams that's beaten Furia, right? So it's just about doing it when it matters the most. And that's more than anything else, it's a mental thing, right? Like, they're one of the most drilled teams out there, a lot of protocols, you know, good team play, good utility usage, good game plans, a pretty decent map pool now as well. They have the individuals that can pop off. They just tend not to really at the same time or in some of these biggest games. And I think also the fact that they didn't play rivals, so they had a longer period of time to just, you know, rest for a little bit, go into a boot camp before stage 3. And I know they went 0-2 in Austin and had to grind their way back, but I think also if you do well in the best of ones, you know, you don't have to play a crazy amount of games to win the major. I mean, sure, you need to play 3 best of 3s at the minimum and a best of 5, but, you know, depending on who you go up against, there might be some maps that you worked on or that you have things prepared on that you don't show until, let's say, the semifinal, and then it can give you an edge deep in the tournament. So I think there's a lot of these factors for MOUZ that makes them low-key dangerous. Like, I feel they're poised to surprise people at the major, and I'll say they might not go and win the whole thing, but I think there's a very strong chance they'll ruin someone else's run, right? Like, out of the maybe 3 teams that we mentioned, Vitality, Furia, Falcons, like, they might beat one of those 3 teams, let's say, in the quarterfinal and then go on to lose in the semis or something like that.
That's what I was going to say before, is that I think that was a kind of similar storyline going into Cologne, because the major had kind of dented a little bit of that after the kind of struggles in the group stage and everything, and then they come into Cologne, ruin Vitality's kind of streak, and then as soon as you get your hopes up, then they play Spirit with Sway's like first event and everything, and then they kind of drop the ball, right? So it's they do seem more of a spoiler than a contender, I think, and then it's just about the one factor they do have going into this that is a bit different is maybe torzsi's home major. I don't know how much it'll matter. That's the meme slide this week, Note, so we can go to that quickly. Is is whether this will actually matter at all. Because, you know, the name of the podcast, MOUZ Fans Come Here, maybe there's not loads of them. There's probably more Yanko fans than MOUZ fans, so we'll
I'm
go
not so
for that
sure.
instead. But this is the thing with the Hungarian major. Maybe torzsi can actually get a little bit going, especially in the kind of smaller, like the stage 3 arena, like that you can tell when teams have fans here. It does seem to be doing something to the players, because I'm here, obviously. And like there's a few like legacy like ultras for no reason, and maybe there'll be some torzsi ultras. Maybe this could actually make a difference to them. I don't know.
I think this might actually be the event where there are MOUZ fans. You're right. It might be a bit different. I did want to pick up on something Yanko was saying earlier about the preparation time and being able to surprise, because that's kind of what they did in Chengdu with Vitality as well. I think X has told me that they didn't expect them to pick Train in that first series or something. And just having that kind of preparation time to go into something, even if it's not that, you know, you're suddenly picking a map that's your permaban, but just that you're putting work into a map that isn't expected, can actually change a lot, both in the veto, but also just when you actually go into the server and are able to surprise like that. And I'm not sure if it's obviously not easy to predict, but if you end up going 3-0 in stage 3, you've really only played, you know, 4 to 5 maps going into playoffs. And that does give you a lot of versatility going into playoffs, and when you're able to flex your map pool a little bit more and change how you're approaching those games. So there is something to that whole approach in that stage. It's just, it's become so hard to predict how teams are going to perform that you can't even judge how long teams can hold on to, you know, like something that they've worked on during the last like 2 weeks until that stage. Because if it gets into like a 2-2 game, they're not going to wait till playoffs to show, you know, if they worked on something like that.
And there's also the mind games with MOUZ, because it seems like they play all these teams so often, right? I think it was that Inferno against Vitality where it's just like, even to someone who doesn't watch loads of demos, that was obviously a very mind gamey type match. And I think that's true of a lot of MOUZ games, and I think that's why they are so dangerous against these kind of massive favorites in those situations where they can be the underdog, is that, you know, they do have those mind games. They always seem to have something a little bit new, at least at the start of a match, and like they can have these kind of hot starts against the big teams. And they're just a well-structured team. They have the pieces in the right places, and I think signing Spinx did add a new dimension to them in a way. I think, I think it did make a big difference to them compared to having Brollan, who was a bit more hit and miss firepower-wise. And we can talk about the balance of the team and everything, but I think having these pieces who have played together for so long and know all these mind games so instinctively does make a big difference in those big games.
I think it's just they struggle when it's situational Counter-Strike, right? In the mid-round sometimes when it's 4v4s and you need to come up with something on the fly, and it's not, and that's not always only on the IGL to constantly make those calls for people. Like, you know, sometimes a guy who's on the extremity needs to recognize the situation and perhaps say, all right, guys, can you throw some utility, like do something on your side of the map can create some space, draw attention to yourself, so I can go for a play here. I think I can take a lot of space. I can maybe go for a flank. I can do this. I can do that. They're lacking a bit of that push and pull, in the mid round to cause some rotations from the CTs and then to abuse them, right? Some of that high level Counter-Strike when it comes to that, and that's where you have individual players who can excel or teams that can excel at that. Furia is very good at that, and Fallen's style of calling was sort of that. That's what it revolved around for the most part. A team like Vitality has guys like Zyphon and Rops, who are obviously incredible at in the clutch, and a very experienced IGL in Apex who knows how to do these things. Falcons, again, same conversation when it comes to the caliber of players that they have, and actually they are still working towards that. That's one of the things that Falcons particular can improve at. So for MOUZ, that's the issue. As I mentioned, they have great protocols. So when they get out of spawn and say, we're going to do this cave take, or we're going to fight for mid this way, that's all great. But unless it goes straight into a 5v3 from that opening move, is against the best of the teams is where they tend to struggle in some of those, even at times when they have a man advantage situation and whatnot. So whether that's because of compared to practice or some lower stakes games, the pressure gets to the players and they sort of shut down a little bit. I mean, I experienced this as a coach, right? Like when one of the first tournaments with FaZe and we're playing Inferno and like our T side is shit and usually it's been pretty good. And I'm, rewatching the game and like what's going on, and I see we're just so slow to take map control, and like in scrims, people are running around and flash for me here, molly this, I'll take abs, take that, and then if we're not getting banana, guys on bridge watching window, right? Like they're not doing that. So it was like, okay, we need to be doing this in games like we do it in practice. We need to put more pressure, take more control. So maybe that's something that is a struggle for them. Some of these players whose responsibility is to make those sort of calls and make those sort of plays, maybe go a bit more quiet and are relying on the IGL to make the call, and then he usually doesn't have to do that. And but honestly, they've been together for so long at this point in time, it should have gotten better. Like they should have come up with a fix by now.
How much stock do you think you put in the kind of narrative around it not really being Brollan being full in-game leader, and they're kind of having to mix it between Zersh and torzsi, Brollan, everyone? And I think that kind of committee calling kind of plays into exactly what you're saying, where then once it gets tough, then suddenly it is Brollan's job and the other guys go quiet. Do you think that actually happens within the team?
I mean, I imagine so, where they just don't have. I mean, it's a dynamic that should be normal for every team, right? Like if you have an opper who likes to be aggressive or a very aggressive rifler, and he has his moves he wants to go for, I mean, that makes your job easier as an IGL, right? Like because he's giving you something that he wants to do at the start of the round. And of course, all these teams by this point, okay, he likes to go for this sort of a pick and wants to take mid on ancient this way. What the rest of the team is supposed to do, right? Like you have it set up in case he succeeds or fails, so that you're not just stuck. Not everyone's waiting to see what he's going to do, so you're able to react on that whichever way it goes. And of course, there's also a balance. If you feel as an IGL, you have a call that's going to work, and you can obviously always shut down the player and say, no, we're going to do this, right? Because you don't even need to explain yourself. You just say, hey, I want us to do this now. And there needs to be that mutual understanding and respect where, the final call is with the IGL. That's his job. But for the most part, the players get to do really what they want. And it comes down to preparation too, to have things in place when they do go a bit more quiet. And I think you definitely have experienced that if you were a MOUZ multiple times. I mean, in so many of those finals against Vitality or some of the other games lately, right? There has been absolutely moments where you can just see them playing default, not really being dangerous whatsoever, not really applying great pressure. So I think for the coaching staff too, it would have been something where they can see it and say, all right, maybe we need to have more set openings that we can call, or just rounds that we can call when the players go a bit more quiet. And it's also one of the things, for example, that you would do perhaps, let's say you lose a 1v3 clutch, right? Like sometimes right after that you take a timeout so that, players don't tilt out of their minds, and maybe you give them just a call so they don't need to think too much, right? Like you give them something to do, you have a more set call so it doesn't linger in their minds. They're focused at the task at hand, and hopefully, it works, you win the round, and then no one cares about the 1v3 that you lost, just a round ago.
It's interesting because I've talked to MOUZ players in like interviews many times at events to try and pick at that exact thread about, this whole narrative about whether the other players are calling and how much impact Brollan's having down this stretch. And every time they say that it's Brollan who's still making the calls, but then when you stand there next to them and you're hearing their comms, a lot of the time at the starter rounds, it is torzsi or Exertion calling the openings and calling what their initial moves are, especially on CT side. So it kind of makes me think about what you were saying at the start, Yanko, about the way that they play the openings of rounds versus the mid rounds, and that onus then going to Brollan to make those calls later in the round, and how much of that divide actually is created by the way this is structured for them to have these kind of openings and give them freedom at the start of rounds. Because if you have that kind of, if you have their structure set up so that, you know, a lot of the opening rounds, especially on CT, are called by torzsi and Exertion, and then the end goal kind of goes to Brollan, it does create a certain dynamic where there can be a disconnect, and then when there's pressure mounting towards the bigger games, it makes it hard to actually make those adjustments if you don't have that consistent experience, I think.
Well, yeah, but also I think a lot of teams have a different caller for CT side.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's one of the things where maybe someone who's just a little bit better at reading the opponent, which is important for CT side, and also usually you have one guy calling it, but we like to have two designated guys sort of for the bomb sites who are going to control that bomb site, right? So you're talking about Inferno, and let's say you have Kiksan there on Falcons, and he's calling the fighting there with Kyosuke and what openings and how are they going to go for it. But then you have whether it's Nico or Monesi on A, and they're just on that side of the map are saying, all right, let's play for brackets, let's play all short, let's play double pit, and those things, so that you're always on the same page about how you're going to defend. And I think it's really important to understand that, you know, you're going to play a great CT side. These bomb sites have to be connected. You know, you have to understand, all right, if we're playing 3B or mid-round, we're retaking top banana, you know, that's when the pit player should smoke apps, right? So as the play is happening, because the T's will get the information. Maybe you get a kill as CT, you get good info. They might try to react because they see that it's 3 players, you know, on B, and this way you're sort of preempting it, making it more difficult for them to react and buying time for your guys to go back to A and for you to make the rotation. And you still see that with teams nowadays where they make these mistakes, where they're making a play, but they're just, you know, it seems like the guys on the other side are unaware of what that means for them just because they're static and they're not doing much. But for the side of MOUZ in particular, you know, that's normal. And also the Opera, right, saying what he wants to do. I think in general, you need to have a call every round. That call can be, let's just play default, and you don't need to make an early play every round, right? But if you're thinking they're going, you know, you're thinking, are they going to default? They're going to try to do something fast, so we spend more utility early. If we think they're going to default, we can chill a little bit in the early round, and then we can make a play in the mid round, or we can just play for saving nades, right? Jiggle peeking with smokes out and just trying to buy as much time as possible, right? Because maybe you went aggressive the round before, a couple of rounds before, and now you know that they're going to spend more utility to take map control because they're scared of, you know, you playing in a similar fashion. T side is where it gets a bit more.
So part of the reason I bring this up is because I think MOUZ's CT sides haven't really been the issue. Like Harry put this together as part of it, and their CT sides aren't really what's been the problem recently for them. I'm not sure if Harry, if you had a specific thing you wanted to point out with this, because it is a trend at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think you can almost go back to the Shui move and kind of, it's obviously, we never really found out completely why, apart from just kind of various like vague things. But I think part of it must have been Zyphon and torzsi wanting to have a bit more control over the CT side. And I think we've kind of seen why and how that does work, like exactly what Jank is saying about the kind of having that CT caller. And because Shui wanted to play a lot of these rotate spots, that obviously means he is able to call from those positions in a way where on a lot of maps Brollan can't really, and that does make Zyphon kind of more of the figurehead on CT side. And I think the Zyphon torzsi combo is very good on CT side for exactly this. And the kind of more interesting thing on this chart is what happened to the T sides kind of at the end of the first season. And I think like the simplistic fan forum comment would be that, you know, they ran out of Shui's playbook and had to start creating their own stuff, and then it's been a bit harder with Brollan. Like, I don't think that's completely true, but I do think this is a weird trend that they've kind of flipped from being a very good T team at the kind of start of Brollan's reign, and then now kind of being more of that CT focus. And obviously there were economy changes and everything, but this was before that happened. I think that happened at like Cologne, so the trend had already started.
Yeah, potentially also the uptick in CT side is just getting more firepower in terms of getting Spinx over Shue, right? That shouldn't be underestimated either. But yeah, I mean, it's also because a lot of these games are whatever grand final, semi-final, deep in the tournament, and you're playing on stages, you're playing against really good teams, and you need to have your players step up. Like you're not going to outread your opponent or outread your way into a tournament win, right? Like in at some point in the tournament, your players are going to have to deliver your rounds. You're going to have torzsi and Spinx win you a 2v4. You're going to have guys come up clutch. You're going to have Exertion find you some crazy opening kills at times, right? And that's just been inconsistent for them. It got, comical at some point where, all right, Exertion's having a game. Well, that means torzsi is going to go 4-14, right? And they're just taking turns in who's going to go missing and who's going to drop the ball at a really important moment. And I mentioned it, I don't know if he's had slightly better last couple of tournaments, but someone who's flying under the radar in all these MOUZ conversation is Jimpphat, because he was like in conversation for closer of the year or anchor of the year last year, and this year, I mean, it doesn't feel like it's anywhere near. I can see now the numbers are backing it up, but it doesn't have any sort of the level of impact that he's had, especially when you look at the clutches, right? I mean, you felt in some of those games for MOUZ, he would have crazy clutches, 1v2s, just sort of the Zyphon-esque in a way in which he would find impact and bring rounds back for his team. And he isn't useless, but he's just being like kind of, 1.01 rating is the definition of average. It feels like.
I think also the 43% one-on-one win rate is pretty bad considering how consistent he used to be beforehand with that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was going to draw attention to in this slide is literally because he was that type of player where, okay, Mirage B, it's a boring spot, but when you have someone like Jimmy there, then like a few times a half, they're going to have to rotate to A. It's going to be like a 1-on-2 retake. And sometimes you'd even back Jimmy in that situation last year. And it feels like there's just not quite happening at the same degree. I don't know really exactly why, but yeah, like when we're talking about one-on-one percentage in this context, that's a one-on-one is you should win more than 50% of the time, because a lot of the time it's traded, right? You're the guy who's in the one-on-one, and it used to be a 1-on-2 for the other team, right? So a 43% is low, like very low. And even if a lot of them are post plants, whatever, this still kind of speaks to how that's just a few rounds a half, which could be really important swing rounds, and he's just not winning them in the same way. And yeah, I think it just makes it a bit tougher. And I think that's an important part of anchoring that people don't often always talk about, is also how good are they at rotating in these tough situations? Because I think that's really what Jimmy was such an expert at last year, even maybe more so than Sightholds themselves.
I mean, there's also, just off the top of my head, I don't know which tournament it was. Maybe it was Pro League or maybe it was a bigger one. But there was that crazy clutch where Jimmy and torzsi were 2v1 on Nuke, and torzsi ran through the molly or something, or, he had a bit of a brain fart play. But even from that point on, it was a 1v1, and Jimmy was just running like an elephant, right? And ran out heaven, and sort of, it felt like that was a very, that's like a guy just... I'm not saying he was tilted. Probably torzsi was tilted from what he did, but that's just not the way you play that. Like, you need to be way more calm in that situation. You're still in a decent 1v1 for yourself. I think it was maybe against Falcons, and m0NESY was the other guy. That was like a m0NESY 1v4 maybe that ended being a 1v2 against the two of them. But I was watching that. I was like, wow, that's gross, Like, and you're talking about MOUZ's aspirations to be the best team in the world and lift trophies, and that's supposed to be your guy, that's your ROPS to some extent that you want to count on, is like, that's not great. And that's just one round, I know, but there hasn't been many Jimmy moments, this year that you can think of off the top of your head.
It's one round, but it kind of illustrates what Harry and you were both talking about, in the sense of the way that he approaches the situations is just different, and not in a good way. Like, it shows not a mechanical issue, it's the mentality or the way that his mindset is during those clutches has just changed for some reason. Like like essentially what Yanko's talking about, for those who haven't seen this clip, is that torzsi time was at like 8 seconds or something. m0NESY had killed one player. He was planning on UK site, and he went to plant bomb on A. torzsi ran through a molly, died. He could have waited for time, and then Jimmy was rotating from ramp, and m0NESY had no idea where he was, and he decided to hold W and run even though bomb had just been planted. m0NESY was like 1 HP, had no idea where he was originally, and then obviously m0NESY could just play off of that and easily kill Jimmy at the end. So it does show that it's weird, because the way that Jimmy would play those kind of rounds last year, it was just like you would back him in those kind of rounds, no problem. And I remember watching that clutch happen live, and I was like, oh, this is like I don't back Jimmy at all. Like I didn't have confidence in him in that clutch, and that was surprising to see that shift that quickly, considering how consistent he was last year.
Mm-hmm. And he was one of those who jumped like a crazy amount on 3.0 as well, because it kind of suits his playstyle of seeing no one for half the half, and then the other half, like all his kills are super impactful, right? So I think it's an interesting one where like not many of his roles changed with Spinx coming in, but maybe there is a little bit of a less emphasis on him as the late round piece, because just naturally on T side, Spinx is kind of the primary lurker in a lot of these situations. But then it's the CT side stats which have really, really changed for Jimmy. And I think that's just kind of harder to pin down to anything in particular. And it's more, and they're still having these amazing CT side round win percentages even while this is happening. So it's just something where it's very hard to know exactly what's causing the kind of shift in kind of mentality that you guys are kind of describing.
You can tell also he's lost confidence. Like it's not, and that's, you know, just further adds to the issue. We saw what happened to NAF for, you know, a good part of the year. When a player completely loses confidence, it starts spiraling, and he was able to bring himself back. And we'll see. I mean, I said about MOUZ towards the end of last season, you know, it's like MOUZ was never going to make a change during the player break this summer, right? But they absolutely have to make one. I feel like if they don't win the major, because you sort of regressed in terms of results. It's been worse this season compared to last. I mean, you're not making finals all the time. You're losing to some of the other teams. Other teams have passed you now. The likes of Furia, they can't beat Falcons either. So you, at that point, you have to make a change. I think a lot of it comes down to talking about these players. You know, you talk about, for example, you know, Exertion. He is supposed to be the Nico of this generation, right? Or, you know, like the MOUZ players are the young up and coming guys who are, you know, the new generation of these players. Jimmy, the Rops maybe of the next generation, right? Like that's where the comparison is. Like that's what you're aiming for in a way if you're going to be world number one, and that's what you're waiting to see, if these guys can develop into some of these other names. It doesn't have to be, I'm not saying exactly the same, right? But that type of a player that can have impact and play well in big games, can they live up to those expectations or not? And I guess the jury is still out for the most part, but it hasn't looked great this year because of the amount of opportunities that they've had, right? And then the killer is, you know, it's not even that you go on and lose to Spirit in Cologne. It's like you get 3-0'd. You know, you get 3-0'd by the Mongols. It's like, or lose like in the semifinal again. So it's not even competitive. You know, you're just not there whatsoever. And for me, that's the inexcusable part, right? Like you can go up against Donk and Shiro on their best day, and you know you can just go and lose, albeit never mind that Zwei is there and they're a dead team walking. But to get swept 3-0, you just look at Spirit, how they've been, you know, the entire year more or less, right? Like you can't lose 3-0 to them in Cologne after you just beat Vitality. It's just, you know, it's those moments where you really struggle to have faith in MOUZ.
How much do you put it down to just kind of we're in a firepower era, right? Because Fury is that kind of example that has broken in, but then maybe that doesn't really deny that it is a firepower era with how good Molodoi and KSRO are at the moment. And you just kind of look at MOUZ's players and you just don't really see the same peaks. Like even when they have won tournaments or been in finals, like often it's loser MVPs because they're all so split and they all take turns and when to peak and everything. How much is it just ultimately their players don't quite have the firepower for those big moments?
If you ask me, man, we're always in the firepower era, right? Because that's what I believe in. I believe that when it comes to the biggest games, you know, the players have to step up. Even if you talk about Navi of last year, right? Like, which were the team that didn't have the superstars, you know, or the biggest of names and as much firepower as maybe other teams, and were still able to win a lot of tournaments, win the major, obviously. Still, at key moments, they had their individuals step up and deliver them important rounds, right? Like JL was one of the most top 5 impactful players, I mean, last year, without a doubt. And many of the tournaments that they did win was him stepping up in playoffs and just these swing rounds, managing to find impact bit here and there. So if you ask me, it's always going to come down to that, because the average player or the average level of teams is pretty high at this point in time. You know, teams know how to do pretty much everything on these maps that they play. You are rarely, as I said, when it comes to these big games, going to, right, like just outcall them completely and always be one step ahead. You just have to play predominantly default on T side, and for that you need to have good players who know how to react, who know who are decisive, right, and who can win these fights. And you have to have guys who can win you clutches, right, and win you some of these post plans. So that's all firepower to me, right? I don't know if people still think when you say firepower that you're just thinking raw aim or raw mechanics, but that's not the way I see it.
I think Note's brought up the slide, so might as well pivot to this now. Is that torzsi is in that interesting conversation where the teams that are ahead of MOUZ, basically, they all have like top AWPers. I know your views on Shiro might not be quite with the community consensus on how good he is, but I still think he's a level above torzsi, right? And I think this graph is kind of why I think that. And this is stats for people. This is when they have an AWP in buy v buy rounds. So this isn't overall stats. This is just when they're AWPing. And torzsi is very low fragging. He's very, very hard to kill, but like he's in the same corner as like Icy and NQZ, who are very, very passive AWPers if you think about the way they actually work in the mid round. And on openers, he's quite aggressive because he does have those set plays and the openers and everything. But this is kind of, I think this says a lot about his kind of risk aversion at times in MOUZ. When you compare it to the Shiro, Zyphon, Molodoi, Manasi people who are able to hit kind of crazy fragging numbers when you've invested that 5k gun into their hands. And I think that's really important for teams. And it's a weird conversation to have because I think for me, clearly he's the 5th best AWPer in the world. Like a lot of the people who look better than him on this are playing much worse opposition because of how deep MOUZ go and how often it's top 5 teams. But I do think this is concerning that he's kind of fragging a good 0.10 less than the top AWPers, because when you do get to those conversations in those big games, it's not just Zershan anymore. It is kind of, it's everyone that has to step up, and ultimately I'm just not sure they have it in them to step up in those moments.
I don't know how much of it is in terms of that he maybe does more, he has to do more supporting, especially on their T side, where then maybe he doesn't have the space he would like to have, potentially. I mean, obviously the chart speaks for itself. In terms of the output, it would have to be better. But yeah, I'm not really sure, right? Like whether that's something that, you know, similar to when you talk about Brokey before in some of these FaZe lineups. It's just like there's so many aggressive rifle in the Elite lineup. There's so many aggressive riflers. It's like, well, you know, he has to do supporting most of the time, or whether it's just he's just not connecting on his skills. He's just not taking advantage of the opportunities that he gets.
I think what really surprised me when I saw this graph is you would expect, especially from the conversation, and even just watching Spirit, that Shiro would be further back on it. Like torzsi and Shiro wouldn't be this distinctly far away from each other. But the fact that torzsi is this far down in kills per round, and you watch them play, and it feels like he does have a lot more of that impact because he goes for those openings. I'm genuinely surprised that he ended up this far down, because you would think that Shiro, in terms of the way that his style is in Spirit is set up to be that kind of, back end, not necessarily supportive opper, but he does take those angles and he's playing more for their system. And torzsi does that as well. It's just this distinct fragging difference really does make a huge impact when you don't have the stars able to consistently step up around him, because you have either, like Yanko was saying earlier, sometimes you have torzsi fragging and then Exertion's dropped off and he's like 4 and 14, or you have Spinx fragging and then you have torzsi and Exertion just having bad maps. So it's like you don't have the structure where these players are actually all coming up and stepping up at the same time, especially in these important matches, I think. And you see that in these kind of finals as well. So, I mean, when you look at this graph and you look at what we were talking about earlier, Yanko, about how MOUZ's entire system is set up overall, like what do you think they actually need to change to make this, take this step up, I guess?
I think off the top of my head, also torzsi probably more aggressive in some of his, those early peaks or some of the early openings, which maybe with the higher risk, right, he doesn't find as much success as he would like. In that case, maybe just lower the number of attempts if you're not really able to convert. Sure that the danger, and the pressure of you going for it, it still counts for something if you don't find the kill, but you need to be able to have better output. And I think for Shiro, it's not about like it's more that it's about sitting back and just getting the kills that come to you, right? Like he doesn't create that many opportunities for himself. He just cleans up off of the space that Donk has created for the most part and the other riflers, and he is incredible in the clutch and he's a very, very safe pair of hands, but he's not really going to surprise you, and he isn't going to play super aggressive with the op or play close angles with the op. Like you can with a pretty high degree predict where Shiro is going to be, or rather you can count on where he won't be. And that was my sort of issue with Shiro. It wasn't that he's a bad opper or anything like that. He's a great opper. It's just for my money, I would like him to spice it up a bit more, just so that when you prepare to go up against Spirit, you can say, all right, like he can do a number of different things. And I think we saw him try and do that. But yeah, I think when it comes to the torzsi conversation, I don't want to go out and like keep trying to find him excuses and say, oh, it's the play style and he has to do some more supporting, because this is like when you do have the op, you're getting it for a reason, and then you also need to have rounds built in a way where you're taking advantage of that, and you're not just might as well got in an AK if all he's going to do is sit back and then be in a 2v4 right late when his riflers die.
I think that's the exact point I always thought about with torzsi and Shiro, is that the frustration with Shiro is often that you can see he does have the ability to do more with his talent, right? And he is able to be in that kind of top 4 AWPer, whereas torzsi is just very much the best of the rest. Like there is a big gap, and then torzsi's style I don't think even is particularly his problem. I think he's good at getting those openers and still maintaining a kind of low def count. It's more just ultimately like you just don't have that star power that those top 4 AWPers do have at times, and maybe more the top 3 I'm talking about here is the kind of Molovo Monesi take a game by the scruff of its neck type thing. I just think torzsi can do it on occasion, but it's nowhere near consistent enough, and that's why he's got like a 106 rating for the year or whatever. That is why he isn't on the same level, and I think it's ultimately about whether MOUZ can win as a committee and not really about whether torzsi can suddenly be as good as those 4 other players.
I think also a little bit of the conversation that we mentioned about, the new generation of players, who's going to be who, and you're talking about torzsi. Can he be the next, I don't want to say simple, but one of the great toppers of CSGO? And then and at times you look at it and you're thinking maybe, but then someone like Molodor shows up and you can tell he's him instantly, right? So that's also the issue, because you have other guys, probably if you're talking about riflers, Kyosuke is there, obviously. Donk too. I mean, in a universe of his own, really, in a way. But that's the issue. Like, other guys show up who instantly they hit the ground running, and you can just tell like they're really, really good. And high pressure, low pressure situations, it doesn't really matter. They're not perfect, but they're really good. They're consistent. So that's the problem when you start talking about some of these MOUZ players, because of how much time has passed. At the start, you could have been like, all right, let's give them some time. Well, now there's been time, and there's been other people with less time who've done better. So we're running out of excuses for them at this point in time.
I can't wait until some publication picks up your quote and just says, Yanko, can torzsi be the next Simple?
Hey, they
and just
both
runs
had,
that.
They both had the same lessons, or torzsi
That's
play
true.
like torzsi, play like Simple. So there's similarities there.
I think just before you say, Ari, I think one thing that is also concerning is that obviously MOUZ won their trophy earlier at the start of this year and haven't done anything since then. And the conversation around that before they won their trophy was, can they do it? They keep choking right before it. And after they won that, people you thought that could be the breaking point, that would be what actually allowed them to consistently win titles. But I feel like the conversation almost has to go back to that in that sense, because it's been so long that they've been chasing that and just haven't been able to get it done.
I mean, I said on I don't know which podcast at this point, but I think MOUZ, let's say they don't make a change going into next year, they should play every single PGL tournament next season and hopefully win them all, right? Because perhaps what could help them get over this hump is just winning some trophies, right? And it's, I think, cannot be overstated how much lifting a trophy can change a team's complexity. I mean, look at Furia, right? First, yes, it was smaller ones. It was Fisher, it was TWC. Like, who cares? There's some good teams there, but Vitality isn't there, MOUZ isn't there, right? But they've gained confidence through those tournaments that once they got to Chengdu, with that extra confidence, with the extra reps from all these tournaments and learn from some of the losses at Pro League too, right? All of a sudden, it's all come together for them, and now they're the main favorite going into the major. Who would have thought that 2 months ago, right? No one. So there's always the devil's advocate talking about MOUZ is, well, if they can get over the hump in these high pressure games, right? Like, well, then they can be really dangerous in some extent, and perhaps going to some of these PGL events that so far teams like Vitality, they haven't played a single PGL event. Spirit only played the Astana one, I believe, and so on. Falcons only played Cluj and Bucharest, right? So maybe there, with some of the top teams missing, you can go on, lift the trophy. That added confidence then helps you when you go to some of these other events.
That's kind of what I was getting at, though. Like, how long are you gonna be content saying, like, if they get over that hump? Because that was the whole conversation before they won that trophy, and I feel like it's kind of become the whole thing again, where it's like, if they can get over this, then they'll win a trophy. And you kind of talked about it earlier in the show as well, is that, maybe if they don't do something at this major, they have to make a change. But then where do you look at that change? Like, Harry, you had something you were going to say before, so if you want to say,
do you think it's arena, or do you think it's just against the best teams? Because I think it's a different thing, right?
I think it's more the best teams than the arena, right? At this point, they've had enough experience, they've had enough reps in the arena where that shouldn't play a part anymore. And if it is for a certain player, that player needs to be replaced, because, I mean, if you're not used to it by now, you'll never get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have their facility with crowd sound, so I'm told that's all you need.
Yeah, it's working clearly. But it's the thing with this team is just, if you ever do look into the numbers, like, they're just so uninspiring with the actual output they all put up, like, once the kind of going gets tough. And I think it's this difficult thing where, like you mentioned, roster changes at the start of the show, right? Of if they don't win the major, then if they want to be a team that does aspire to be that major winning team, then there has to be something. And I think it's just hard to look at it and know where to start almost, because they're all such good players, but they're just below the elite in kind of all across the board. Like Jimmy this year has been very good anger, but not on the same level as last year or what other players have done in that role. And it's kind of the same with all of them. Like they're all very, very good A-tier players. And it's hard to know what they can actually do in the market to kind of change that fact, to be honest, unless they do go for some kind of unknown player who does have that kind of Molodoi-like impact. Because I do think that it's that type of thing where if they have one kind of true superstar that can tip them over the edge in some of these games through the top 5 teams and kind of bring them up to that firepower point, then that's kind of the conversation again. But I don't see how they actually reach that point, even if they do go into the market.
I mean, they have to swing for the fences, and MOUZ as an org has done a tremendous job of developing talent, right? Obviously, 3 players are from their academy team, and then they got Spinx and Brollan for free, I guess, or whatever, for a bargain from NIP. So I think you have to go for it, right? Like if you're talking about replacing Jimmy, you need to look at guys like potentially Bit, but Navi would never let him go. You look at maybe someone like Frozen, from FaZe, like who is sure unhappy with the way things are going in that team, and they're bound to make more changes in the off season too, right? But I think maybe on an offer, if that's what you want to change, you can take a bigger risk, but because all the other moves available to you just feel like collateral, like would Wonderful potentially be an upgrade for torzsi? Doesn't feel like it, and then all the other names from some of these other teams also are not really making you super excited. I don't know if maybe they see someone like NER0 from Heroic and think, oh, okay, that could be an interesting player. Maybe he's ready to make the next step. But yeah, I think they need to get, especially when we're talking about the problems and the high pressure situations and everything, like you need an experienced guy, you need a veteran who excels in those scenarios and can help then maybe get more out of the guys that stay on the team.
Do you know what that just makes me think of, though, is the kind of, okay, so FaZe, right? We know that they need a better opener and a better AWPer, basically. So wouldn't this the perfect situation be to fix the kind of aura problem and just have FaZe have Xerxon and torzsi next year and just go bang for buck? Or MOUZ even doing that?
Why would they ever go to? Why would they ever go to FaZe? Why would they go?
Well, that's the thing I'm saying, and that's the tricky thing, right? You lose the VRS points when you do that, but kind of having Karrigan, Twist, Frozen, Xerxon, torzsi. There's a few CT problems, but I think that's kind of more a team where I think that I would back in playoffs, regardless of the negatives around Karrigan right now. Maybe you can keep Brollan, but just that idea of having Twist and Frozen, that would just be kind of insane in partnership with a kind of map control pack that is working much better and follows protocols and has this backing of Cyclone, who's really doing an amazing job. We haven't brought him up much, but I think that's a key thing. If they ever do leave, bring Cyclone with them, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if those players would thrive under Karrigan as a caller who is very instinctual and needs players to take space by themselves and be able to make plays, give information and whatnot. We were just talking about how those are scenarios in which MOUZ struggles the most, right? So now you'll be putting them in an environment where that's even more of a focal point of the game. And who knows, maybe Xerxon and torzsi are the 2 guys that are actually the least problematic in that department for MOUZ. We don't know from the outside, but yeah, I just don't think any MOUZ player would go to FaZe at this point in time. Jimmy even turned Falcons down last year, right? They dodged the bullet with that one in the end, but it's just, they're not anymore, but they're still a top 5 team, right? So going somewhere else that's not Vitality or arguably Falcons or Fura is like, what's the point?
I think it's almost just, obviously, that's an outlandish idea, obviously, but I think it more just makes me sad about Twist's decision, really, to go to FaZe when it was kind of pretty clear that nothing was going to hugely change with the players that they had, especially if he knew he was going to be replacing Rain, and that was kind of the lineup going forward. Is it Twist is a guy who probably should have waited for the off season and would have had pick of the litter with a lot of these teams, because he is this player who could kind of elevate MOUZ in my view, and there's just not very many players like that.
Yeah, true, absolutely. They would have loved him, but I think he's also a bit of an emotional guy in terms of how he makes his decisions, right? And just everything that's been going on in Team Liquid, he wanted to go somewhere that with a familiar feeling. You know, obviously he would, or maybe thought he would still have the fully same core with Brokey and Carrigan and Rain being there. I don't know if he was aware of the decision or not from FaZe Clan, but
he told me in an interview at EPL that he wasn't aware of the roster decisions before joining.
Yeah, I don't think he would have been on board with that call. I mean, I don't know anyone who is on board with that call, really, but that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, that would have been, I mean, a great pickup for MOUZ, but I think they're still hoping that these players will find a way to step up, you know. But a good organization would be working on contingencies and looking at, you know, potential options for the off season and who they could approach and how do they want to shape this roster moving forward.
Kind of in what you were saying, do you think that Brollan is the right IGL for them then, in that sense? Like, do you think his style fits what they need?
I don't know. I think the problem is, the thing is also, if let's say you want to bring in a different IGL for them, right? Like, do you feel that Brollan is good enough to just be a player? Or do you feel like then you need to upgrade in that position, right? Because you don't feel like he brings enough firepower as only a player. I think that's the bigger problem when you talk about replacing him, and it's hard to tell from the outside. As we talked about, you know, they have good protocols and all of that stuff. That's mostly set. They struggle in some of this more situational stuff, but how much blame we can put on Brollan for that? Some, absolutely. He is the IGL at the end of the day, but if some of his players, you know, if they end up shutting down, or, you know, sometimes you have players who don't even react. When you tell them to do something, they don't do it. Like, they're so zoned out, you know, they're so focused on their crosshair. The pressure has gotten to them so much that even like when you tell them, hey, do this now, or you told them something and now you're playing the round, and then you see that they haven't moved to the position where you wanted them to move. You know, like, there's all kinds of things that can happen to players in terms of choking and not being themselves in some of these games. So yeah, maybe some of that is on the other players too, but it's just hard to tell. I think once MOUZ makes a change, we'll know who they feel is the problem, right? If they end up changing Brollan, doing something else, okay, maybe he was holding them back and couldn't make these calls. If they end up changing just one of the players and keep Brollan, well, maybe then they feel, all right, this guy was just holding us back and he wasn't able to perform in the high pressure environment.
Yeah, it was less like a replacement conversation and more trying to pull from what you were talking about with Kerrigan's style not really fitting the players. It was more a question about whether Brollan's style does then fit the players.
I wouldn't even call it Brollan style. I'd call it Cyclone style. I think he's for the most part, he's executing the ideas of his coach. And obviously, I think he, you know, has a say in them and brings some flavor of his own. But I think in general, this is how Cyclone sees the game and wants the game to be played. So I think if you look at it that way and take that into account, then he is the good fit for, you know, for MOUZ.
And for Zyphon and torzsi too, kind of having that more malleable in-game league. Like the worst possible example would be someone like Cadian, right, who wants to come in and call things on the fly and everything. Like, Brollan is the complete opposite of that style, and I think that's why for someone like Cyclone it does work to have someone who's a little bit more kind of shaped by him, like, completely as a caller. But I think that the individual stuff is like he's a proper in-game leader now in terms of his numbers, and I think it's quite hard to come back from that. Like, I think someone like Twist, who was very good as a fragging in-game leader and still was the star player, I think it's easier for them to quit in-game leading and come back than for someone like Brollan now, who's spent an entire year dropping like 0.9 ratings and looking at his radar all the time and being this kind of self-essential frag all the time. I think that's much, much harder. I think it would be, I mean, it'd be interesting to see, but I think he already was one of those players who they probably, when they was first looking at Spinx, maybe they probably just wanted to cut Brollan and have Spinx and keep Shuey. And then that would have been a different lineup. But so I don't see him coming back, is what I'm trying to say.
I think one of the names that I thought could have been in tier 1 by now, or at least better than where he ended up, that might be an option for MOUZ to look at would be Zyphon, because I think he's a good player. I was surprised when, after TSM folded, he went to Sashi. I thought he might be, on the Auraless' radar or this or that, or have a go at, some international lineup or anything along those lines. But just as I was like scrolling through, I think that's one of the names that you might see in this offseason get picked up by a team that we see more often in the tier 1 circuit.
Yeah, I mean, before we turn to the forum threads, Harry, I mean, you had these pictures at the end of the slide, and I'm not sure what you wanted to talk about directly with them, but I'll give you the chance to lay it out.
There wasn't anything crazy. I think it's time for the forums. They were more just little backing tracks. If we end up,
I mean, the Spinx one is crazy because it's like you have willingly left a team that has Zyphon on it, right? I mean, that's crazy, and I think it shows, right? Like sometimes players don't know how good they have it, right, and then get spoiled and start making not the best decisions because what's holding them back in MOUZ is exactly what Vitality has and has had. It's like clutch players, great players who step up, when it matters the most. I think it's one of the, definitely one of the more puzzling decisions that you've had from an individual player, to be so open about it and willing to do that. It's just kind of wild.
Maybe it's just what we need to kind of leave parity errors behind, because it's the Kiabi thing all over again, really, isn't it? It's just the only way you can have an error is if one of your best players leaves of his own volition and forces you to kind of make an upgrade.
Yeah, history repeats itself.
Well, I think, Yanko, we prepped you before the show. We told you that we like to end with some forum threads, and I'm not sure. Are you a sports mode user, or do you ever go into the HLTV forums?
I'm a sports mode user. Yeah, I stay away from the forums. I leave that to Chad. He is the lurker around. Actually, not just an active member of the forums.
Yes, he's probably the only person I've seen go in and regularly comment and argue with people on HLTV forums. It is quite surprising.
Anytime there's anything like wrong on the HLTV database or something, it's always at Striker, at Prof, at Sponge, and it's just what's he gonna do? He's got to just go to the database and fix it. It's just what happens now. But he's always there. He's always replying.
Well, we have two back-to-back threads. This one's by Merciless Killer with a Polish flag, who's a fan of Falcons, and it says the most Auraless team, MOUZ. Nobody can beat that. And then there's a thread right after by Base Takes with a Danish flag, who loves Dick Stacy, that says MOUZ Aura. Something changed. They got Aura now. Got chills with Brollan saying they will smash Vitality on CT side train. They're bad at T side, I promise you that. Only guy without Aura is Spinx. Other four have some sort of Aura. Would you agree with this, Yanko? Do you think the other four outside of Spinx have Aura?
No. Definitely not all of them. I don't know what kind of Aura Brollan could have. I mean, all of Jimmy's Aura comes from, his Twitter escapades, right? Outside of that, I'm not sure you can talk much about his Aura. Exertion, not so much either. They're all so polite and well-mannered, even in interviews, right? You can say for torzsi, there's some fire in there, right? And he's got some Aura, but he needs some more frags at this point in time rather than Aura would help MOUZ a bit more, I think.
Yeah, it is funny the disconnect between the kind of what they're like in interviews and what they're like in comms type thing. I don't know if it's just media training or what it is, but like it's such a fiery team when you stand next to them, and then you get none of that personality. It's almost like Brokey's comms in Carrigan's videos. Like you can never see the same guy in front of a microphone.
Yeah, I think also now you reminded me, we had like a clip from, I think it was Chengdu or something, or a MOUZ round, and there's so much going on. Like there's so much loud talking and everything, and I'm like, I mean, yeah, they're communicating, but bro, this is a bit, this is too much. Like this is a lot of chaos, right? Like they need to chill. And then if you take that into account and talk about what are some of the issues that they have, well, all of a sudden, maybe you can pinpoint communication being one of those reasons, things getting lost in all that yelling, or players unable to focus enough on just playing because of everything that's going on in TeamSpeak. You need to be careful about how you strike that balance. And Kirby, I mean, it just came to my mind because he was on FaZe for a little bit while I was still coaching. He had this thing, which I thought was actually smart. He had a bind on TeamSpeak where he would mute TeamSpeak, like sounds from his teammates as well, like communication, because when he's lurking and they're executing on the other side and everyone's coming, like flashing now, like doing all this stuff that has nothing to do with him, right? And he can't hear people running around and he can't hear the rotations. So he would like cut that for, a couple of seconds in scenarios in which there's nothing that can be communicated to him, right? And really, and I'd never heard about anyone doing that. I thought it was like actually kind of smart. But obviously, you need to find the right balance with that too. But in talking about the stage and everything that goes around, like getting that sound cue might be super important.
I just wanted to shut up MSN on config or something. But yeah, I think it's always that thing where you kind of want to flatten the comms. Like you don't want them to be too good and too excited when they're good, because then you really, really notice it when people aren't in the same mental space, and stop doing that. Like it's too drastic. Whereas if you're kind of more kind of calm in the really good moments as well, maybe. It's an interesting one because it's always seen as a positive the way they communicate, but I think there is maybe something to that.
It's always better to overdo it than not do it enough, right? Because like you mentioned, you need to have good energy, right? You can't get down on yourself during a game. Shit's gonna happen. Gonna lose stupid rounds. You're gonna make mistakes. Like no one plays a perfect game of Counter-Strike. Even if you talk to a team in a 13-0, like a player will find a round where he could have done something better, right? Like that's just the nature of the game. So having that approach of doesn't matter what happened, they just focus on what's in front of you, focus on the next round, on the next play all the time, and just be active in communication. You need to play good Counter-Strike. You need to constantly act or react, right? Offer utility, offer help to your teammates, see what someone else is doing. If you're dead, you help your teammates in terms of the comms, right? And it's such a fast-paced game where if you're a bit deadpan and don't have a great tone, I mean, it can't work out in that sense. So yeah, you need to be careful about overdoing it, and just screaming things 5 times in a row is like, okay, man, I can hear you. But yeah, it's just such a key part of playing good Counter-Strike, to have good energy and comms that have to pay attention to it at all times.
I think it is interesting though, because what Harry mentioned earlier about them being so different on the server versus in interviews, it does change the way they're perceived or the way that fans flock around them. And I feel like if they actually did try and be a little bit more, if they literally just tried to have a bit more aura in interviews and not, try and play everything down a little bit, I think that people would get more on their side, and that would help them. Like if you have a crowd on your side, it does change the way that you play.
It's hard to have aura when you're losing all the time. I mean, not lose,
that's true.
And then sure, the second, but losing the final all the time and not being able to beat like Vitality ever, and then you do, and then you start losing to other teams, right? Like it's hard to talk trash, and speak from a position of confidence where, that's the case. I think, though, we also saw earlier on when these struggles first show up, them trying to overcompensate, not necessarily in interviews, but on the server. Exertion pushing through smokes, bottom banana on CT side, right, trying to flank in a 5v4 for no reason, right, in an anti-force by round, and they're just trying to sort of, he's making a play that it's shows overconfidence, right, because you want to show you're not scared, that we can match up in these games, and then you overdo it and you get punished for it and you look a little bit silly, so you don't do that, you then tone it, dial it back down and everything. So they've tried to, if anything, play with a bit more aura, even if not showcase it, in interviews or content or whatever. But as I said, until they're just go all the way and win one, it's going to be hard for them to do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's also hard. The classic Jamie Carragher line: no one grows up wanting to be Zershin. They all want to be Nico or Donk. That's just what it's going to be like if you're a young fan.
This isn't directly related to Aura, but we were talking about roster changes earlier, and this thread doesn't really explain who would be replaced, but it's by David332 with an Asia flag, so not even a specific team. And he says MOUZ HeavyGOD, plus HeavyGOD and MOUZ, and finally we got Israeli majority players in MOUZ. So not only would you have the majority, but honestly, it's not even a bad move.
No, it would be a great move, but he's not going to leave G2 now, is he?
He's not leaving.
Right, G2's not letting him go, and I don't know if he would necessarily, want to leave at this point in time, but yeah, I think probably an upgrade over Jimmy from what we've seen this year, and then you wonder if that would be enough for MOUZ to get over the hump. But yeah, I mean, even if you look at arguably, even if you talk about Baddest, who's the other rifler G2 picked up, you could also be like, all right, maybe he could be the difference maker for MOUZ. I don't know.
No shouts to Matt's former teammate, blameF.
Well, I did see, as I was scrolling and looking at names and all these teams, it did come to my mind, because we talked about a veteran player and everything. He just doesn't have as much success. He doesn't have the biggest trophies either. So then you're thinking, okay, would it be an upgrade? Is it more of a lateral move? But yeah, I think it could also be a name that, you might be willing to take a risk on. Probably not for MOUZ, because, yeah, he is, 28 years old, right? So I don't know if you see him necessarily as bringing enough firepower for such a veteran player, because you're making a change to become number one, right? And I don't know if necessarily blameF is that guy.
No, I don't think so. But that's kind of the issue, though, isn't it? Is if you are looking at the market to be that number one team, that's just at some point maybe some teams just have to accept they're not. They're not going to be in that market, but that's the sport, isn't it? You've got to always want to be.
How about your Jambo for torzsi? I don't know if that's another lateral move.
Yeah, it could be.
And then finally we have a thread by Kikert Fanboy, Russian flag, who loves Grix, and it's just called MOUZ. And it's a long one. I'll read it quickly. It says, "Dude, I know this is emotions out loud, but I understand why everyone hates MOUZ." This is posted on November 4th, by the way, so I believe this is after they beat Vitality in the group stage of Chengdu. Another lucky as hell upset, especially that match point where Rop did 81 to Brollan and Flames, nearly killed Exertion in the back of B site. But what's more important is that MOUZ are always pulling off these kinds of upsets, but not capitalizing on it whatsoever. First, they upset Spirit in EPL Season 21 semis, only to get absolutely thrashed by Vitality in the finals. Second, they upset Spirit again in Lisbon to once again deprive us of Donk Ziwu meeting, only to lose to Vitality again in stupid fashion, throwing Mirage from 11-8 up on CT, and losing an Eco at 11-11 on Dust 2, thus causing Vitality and Spirit to meet in semis again, while themselves against losing to Vitality in the finals. In Dallas, they upset Falcons in group finals to put them into semis versus Vitality, while themselves for 1,000th time got thrashed by Vitality in the finals. In Austin, they once again upset defending champion Spirit in quarters, only to lose to Vitality again, with a big shame on their map pick of Mirage. In Cologne, they finally took down Vitality, but disappeared in the finals, not even putting up any resistance on map 1 and map 3, and throwing map 2 from 11-5 up. So then they beat them in the group stage in Chengdu, and then they lost in playoffs, and they were up, was it 12-4 on Nuke, and lost 13-16 in the end, and then lost the series. So there is actually something to this point, where MOUZ are this constant... They like that Yanko said at the start of the show, they're the kind of team that could spoil another team's major run, but are they going to be the team that actually wins the major? Like, this has kind of been their whole path the entire year, so I think it's a fair point.
Yeah, it could be tough. Like, the stars have to align for them, really, in a way. As I said, I think the fact they're not in the spotlight will help them, but they would need a bit of the luck of the draw somehow, right? Like, I don't think they can beat 3 really good teams in the playoffs, right? Like, they would have to, let's say they're 3-0, and then they get a easier team in the quarterfinal. Then they go up against, you know, let's say Furia in the semifinal, and then they take them down. And then in a best of 5, it's someone who you don't necessarily expect, right? Hopefully not Falcons, because they can't beat Falcons, right? So they're hoping someone else takes Falcons out, right? And maybe, yeah, I don't know. It's a bit tough. Maybe if they play Fury in the semis and then Vitality in the grand final. I know Vitality's beat them 100 times, but Vitality, actually a best of 5 is not great for them now because how shaky their map pool is. And MOUZ has improved on Train. So maybe like actually that matchup is leaning a little bit MOUZ's way, because they should have beaten them in that semifinal 2-0 if they hadn't given up on a 12-4 lead on Nuke. But again, that's the thing. We talked so much about the players and what could torzsi do better to get more kills, or is Brollan the right IGL? Man, when you can't, when you are up 12-4, like, it's just a collapse from everyone. It's everyone's fault. Everyone needs to do better. Like, mostly players individually. You can't say, oh yeah, the calling hasn't been great, or oh yeah, this one guy was like holding us back. And the problem is it's happened so many times to them in different ways, where, as the guy so in such a detailed way pointed out in that thread, so many different games where they sort of have these games won and then just finding ways to lose. So ultimately it's down to that. Like, if they figure out a way to get more out of everyone, to change to improve their mental in some sets, they can be a very dangerous team at the major.
Yeah, that's kind of why I thought it was a good thread to close the show, because it's exactly as you're saying. It's not even like one instance where they dropped a big lead. It's just multiple times where they've been in situations that they should have closed out games. But the fact that this guy actually went and highlighted like all of these specific individual situations that they were up, it really does show how consistently they've collapsed when they should have had the game in their hands. And it is a glaring problem. Harry, any final thoughts on this long thread?
I mean, it's too long a thread, isn't it? But yeah, they're just the team of the false dawn. We should have a character limit, 140 characters, just like old Twitter. Only the hottest of takes on our forums, please. This is far too correct.
I didn't know they could get any hotter.
There have been some good threads. There have been some good threads, but surprisingly, it was hard to find threads for MOUZ. I honestly thought that it would be much easier, considering how many MOUZ haters there are.
No one cares.
I think
even
that's
the haters
thing.
don't care. That's the thing.
That's the thing. Half the threads were just
That's
MOUZ
the problem,
aura.
because they don't have a player that you root for or want to see fail either, right? Like, they're just a bunch of, like Harry said, no one's out there saying, I want to be Exertion, right? Yet, but he can change that. Win the major, you might just change that, Exertion.
And then, yeah, just to wrap up the show, I mean, this is being recorded before Stage 2 starts, but it'll go out just before Stage 3. We obviously originally had the idea of doing FaZe if they hadn't made it through Stage 1, but they just scraped through. But so any thoughts you want to leave us with, Yanko, bearing in mind that this podcast won't be out until Stage 3?
You mean with regards to FaZe, or?
No, just in general about the major, or anything you want to close the show with in terms of how we're heading into this last stage of the major.
Man, it's just like, can we please just get rid of the best of ones? I know it's the most boring of conversations and takes, but it doesn't even change the schedule significantly. It doesn't add more days. Just get them out, because it's stupid with MR12. And I think also another thing is that I think people have put too much stock in some teams. I mean, I had Legacy to go through as well in the 3-1, 3-2 bracket, but you shouldn't underestimate for some of these teams that have done a little bit better lately, their potential to choke and their potential to get upset in the best of ones, and then you're in a 1-2 bracket and go up against a good team and all this stuff. So I think people should look at the bigger picture a little bit more. The major is where experience counts for a lot, right? And maybe that's what FaZe had going for them to survive in stage 1.
Harry, any final thoughts before we end the show?
No, just thanks to Yanko for coming on. And let's see who wins the major.